Hey guys, this is Ray Bango for NetTuts, and while I normally write articles for NetTuts, I've decided to do a screencast this time around. I've had a big interest in two-factor authentication lately. I've seen so many of the big name sites like Google, Dropbox, and Microsoft moving into that realm to try to protect your users, and I figured, all right, let me try to figure out how they're doing this and what type of implementation and services are available. So in this particular screencast, I'm going to focus on a service called Authy, which has generated a lot of buzz because it's really simple to use. It provides the security that your users would typically need, but the bottom line is it's just incredibly easy to use. So here's the Authy site. It's authy.com, and so if we scroll down, you'll see it looks like a typical Twitter Bootstrap site, but the big things about this is that it does provide the infrastructure that you'll need as a web developer to offer two-factor authentication. So it does this it does this via a really easy-to-use API, along with an HMAC algorithm, which it's a security algorithm that rotates numbers every 30 seconds, and they have an actual app that they provide their users. It's called the Authy app, and you can get it on iOS or you can get it on Android. And for those phones that don't have the Authy app available, they actually let you use SMS, which is actually really neat. So your users, your users can use two-factor authentication regardless of what phone they're using. So this right here, HMAC RFC 4426, is the same type of secure algorithm that Google uses as well, and so does Microsoft. So it's pretty cool, and I've tested it out, and it looks very, very secure and very easy to use. In fact, one of the FAQs that they talk about is how secure is Authy tokens, and they go pretty much in depth talking about the encryption levels and that it's NSA approved. So I think overall, this is a good service. If a company like Cloudflare, who is in the business of protecting sites from, let's say, DDoS attacks, trust Authy, I'm pretty good with it, and I think I'd use this on my own site as well. And the pricing is pretty reasonable. If we go to the pricing, we'll check it out. For a starter dev box, it's free, so that's great. Free is always nice, and that gives you a chance to kind of get up to speed with the service. And as your users grow, well, then the price tag kind of grows as well. But the cool thing is you can start it off as a free service right here, free, and you can test it out and see how it works for your users. And if you like it, great, then you just move up. Now let's jump into the dashboard. The dashboard's pretty nice. I'll just log in here real quick. Let me go ahead and sign in. Now, the first thing it'll do is ask me for my Authy token, and that's because I already have an Authy ID. It's an internal ID that Authy uses to kind of keep track of this, keep track of individual users that are authenticating on its service. So there are two ways of doing this. One, I can use the Authy app to get the randomly generated number that I was mentioning about. And if we look back here, you'll see this is the app. It just generates these 7-digit numbers that cycle every 30 seconds. The other way I can do this is to request an SMS. So again, those phones that don't have access to the Authy app, you can click, say, request SMS, and it'll actually send it to the cell phone. So yeah, a cell phone is required, and it's going to tie that number to the user, so that way you'll have the ability to do request of SMS. So in this case, I'll put in the number 2701320. Oh, sorry. Actually, it's going to expire in about 5 seconds, so give me 1 second. And so the number should cycle right now, and so I'll put in 3102869. And again, this is the Authy token, and this number will cycle I think it's every 30 seconds if I'm correct. So I'll sign in, and boom, it gets me into the dashboard. Now, I already have an app established, and it has an API key, and it's both an API key for production, and it's also an API key for testing. Now, notice that mine says starter, and that's because I already upgraded the app. I wanted to be able to show you the SMS functionality, and so in that free option that they provide, they don't have the SMS capability built in, so I upgraded, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. Creating an app is incredibly easy. You just go here and say create an app, and you give it an application name. So I can do something like my test app, and I can click on create. And what it'll do is it'll generate a new API key for me. It'll start up the dashboard, and notice that it says learn how the Authy API works now. The cool thing about this is they give you a really quick tutorial of how it kind of works. I'm going to show you it briefly. I don't want to dive into it because I don't want to take 3 minutes of your time up. But if I click now, what it does is it starts walking you through the steps of what a typical authentication would look like. Again, I don't want to go through this because in my experience, this was a nice little demo, but it didn't give me all the details that I needed to actually get this done. So let me go to the dashboard instead. I'm just going to go straight there. All right, so here's my dashboard. Notice that it's a sandbox plan. In the sandbox plan, I can go ahead and tinker with the API as much as I want to. It's going to give me the functionality that I would expect from the API, except for the SMS capability. It's also giving me this API key, which I can use in my code to test with. What I want to do though is, let me go back to the actual dashboard itself. So notice that I have 2 applications in here. Here's the new one that I just created, my test app. And notice that the plans are different. Here's Sandbox and here's Starter. If I want to test the SMS functionality, I need to go to a starter plan. The starter plan is still free, but the difference is that they charge you a 50-cent verification fee in order to get to the starter plan. So if I decided I wanted to upgrade on this, it'll say select a plan, starter is free. And then what they do is they want to charge your card 50 cents for verification purposes. 50 cents for me is not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. And the starter plan just gives me the extra functionality that I want to use. Now, what ends up happening is that when you add a user to your specific application, it'll get listed out here. And so I should have one user here. Here's Ray Bango. Here's my cell phone information. Here's my Authy ID. And so that Authy ID is a unique identifier now that identifies this individual user in your app. It ties it's a combination of the email, the phone number, and the country that the user lives in. That generates this Authy ID, which will carry forward with this user while they're on your app. It's a really important ID because you're going to use this now going forward to actually authenticate this user when they log in. So let's actually take a look at what's going to happen. Let's look at the process. So I've shown you the dashboard a little bit. If you want, you can go into the API tutorial later on and check it out. More power to you. We don't need to do that right now. Let's actually look at how this process works. So I'll go in here and I actually documented it. The process is broken down from what I see into two different scenarios. The first one is actually getting a user registered into Authy so that they can have two-factor authentication. And from my experience, what I've seen is that typically most sites will ask users if they want to opt into two-factor authentication after they've already registered on the site. It's not like you're going to get a new user come into your site. You're going to ask them for all the details, their email, all the information, their personal information, and then you're going to say, hey, register for two-factor authentication. In most cases, what I've seen is that a user will register for the site, and then in their account settings, they'll have an option that says, do you want to enable two-factor authentication? So the way that Authy will work is that you're going to add a user to Authy, and you're going to do this via a country and a cell phone form. There's a couple things you need to send. You need to send their email address, the country code that they live in, and Authy makes this really simple to do, and I'll show you how you can come up with a nice list of country codes very easily, and also their cell phone number. And what this does is this basically sends back an Authy ID to you. All right, this is going to say, hey, this is the Authy ID for this particular user, and you still need to verify them. It's not a matter of just getting the Authy ID and just running with it. You need to kind of verify them. So the next thing you do is you want to present a token form. Now, if you remember, when I logged into Authy, I was presented with that form that said, hey, put in that unique cycling number that the Authy app generates. That's the token that I'm referring to here. And so you want to request that from the user, because when you request it from the user, then you can verify that the information is that they're actually in sync with Authy. So the token comes in to the user, and it can be either via SMS or it can be via the Authy app. And the user enters that token number in there. When they enter this token, what you need to do is you need to send that value, that token value, that dynamically generated number, along with the Authy ID to Authy. You're sending it off via their API, and what Authy is going to do is going to grab those two numbers and going to do some gyrations in the background. I don't know what they do in the background with it, but they verify that the token that was entered actually belonged to the user that corresponds to that Authy ID. And if it's verified, then what you want to do is you want to enable two-factor authentication for the user, and then you want to store that Authy ID, that unique ID that they sent back to you when you register the user. You want to store that into the database, so that way the next time the user logs in, that Authy ID is stored and you can use it going forward. Now, the second part of the process is the login process. So again, going back to the example of the Authy.com website, I went ahead and logged in, and then I was presented with a form that said enter your token, and that token was the dynamically generated number from the Authy app. So following that same mindset and that same user experience, what you want to do is you want to present a login form to the user and let them log in like normal. You want to validate their username and password against your database, and if it validates, then you want to grab that Authy ID, all right? Now, once you've done that, then the next step is to present another form that says, all right, you've validated your username and password, great, but now enter your token. And the reason is because this is where a lot of the hacking happens. People use really poor passwords, common passwords, and so the token is that extra layer of security, that extra layer of the two-factor part of it, that forces a user to actually have a unique piece of information that's part of them, usually on their phone. Typically, a hacker is not going to have that information unless they've somehow managed to hack the phone. And these numbers, it's from what I've read, they're almost mathematically impossible to try to guess or even computationally guess. So that's why this token is the important piece of the puzzle for the two-factor authentication scheme. So again, the token will come from either the Authy app, or you can SMS it to your user, and then when they get the token, the user will enter it in. That information gets sent off to Authy along with their Authy ID, the one that you pulled from the database record. Authy will do their verification process, and if it's verified and it's successful, boom, the user gets in. That's great, easy to do. Let's take a look at some of the code that I created. Now, I used ColdFusion Markup because that's the server-side language that I know. The cool thing about with Authy is that they also have a ton of different server-side options for you. So I believe, let me see if I can find that for you. Where was that? I believe it's in the developer section. Let me go up here, documentation. I'm sorry, guys. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I do know they have... actually, hold on one second. It might be in the dashboard. Let me see. Settings, applications. No, I'm sorry. Listen, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I can tell you that they have code already pre-built for common languages like PHP, Ruby on Rails, Python, just a host of different languages. So you can literally just cut and paste a lot of the pre-built code that Authy has created and just get it to work for you. So let's actually go back to the source code itself that I wrote. I'm using ColdFusion because it's the server-side language that I know, and it just makes it easier for me to whip something up very easily. So if we look at this form, it's a very straight, normal-looking form. It's just, standard plain Jane HTML. The key things that are different are right here. Here, what I'm doing is I'm using something called Authy countries, and with countries input as an ID, and I'm using here Authy cell phone. And the reason I'm using this is because Authy has provided JavaScript helper library that provides that nice country dropdown that makes it incredibly easy for your users to choose a country that they belong in. So you're going to want to include this Authy form, this form.authy CSS file, and you're also going to want to include form.authy .js. And you can grab these off of their GitHub repo, or you can actually grab it off their site. There's plenty of documentation on what it does, but this is pretty much what you want to do. So for example, if I go to the actual code, it's the actual site itself. So let's go here. And if I click in here, notice I have a form, and this is two-factor.cfm, and I click in here, boom, I get a drop down, and this is done by Authy. This is the JavaScript helpers that Authy has provided. So I haven't done anything. This is just pre-built. I dropped it into my code and said, all right, I'm going to add a class and I'm going to add an ID, and now Authy takes care of this. So I can say +1. And then the cool thing is that if I don't enter a cell phone, it actually does some validation for me. So if I click here, notice, boom, I get some validation, which is nice. So if I enter, here's my cell phone, and then I can click on this to enable it. But let's go back to the code so we can see what's actually going to happen first. So again, it's a standard form. I'm just doing a standard post. I'm going to submit to the same file, and then I'm going to grab these values and I'm going to do something with it. Again, there's nothing special to this except for this the CSS file right here and this JavaScript file right here, which are basically helper methods that will provide the country dropdown and also the validation for the cell phone. Now, what ends up happening is when I do a form post and I post back to itself, this is just ColdFusion code that says, all right, let's see if there's a form field called cell phone. If there is, then what I want to do is I'm going to use the CFHTTP tag to send out a post request to Authy behind the scenes. And I know that PHP and Ruby on Rails and Python all have similar functionality. In this case, all this does is it sends a request behind the scenes, and it's going to send it as a post. Now, I'm embedding the API key in here by default. Normally, you'd have some kind of global variable that you can substitute in here. I'm doing it just for clarity. There are 3 things that you need to send, actually 4 things in total. You need to send your API key so Authy knows who's making the request. And that's the API key for your specific app. Remember, you can have multiple apps and each app is going to have an individual API key. You need to send the user's email address. In this case, I'm sending raybango@gmail.com. The cell phone for the user. And the reason is you also want to give the users the ability to receive SMS messages on their cell phone. And then also the country code. So once I send this off, Authy will go ahead and take all this information and attempt to add this user into your application's user list. If the user's already there, then great, it just sends back the Authy ID, no problem. If not, it creates a brand new user and a brand new Authy ID. So let's take a look at what would happen. Here is what's called a CF dump command in ColdFusion, and all it does is it dumps out the contents of whatever a specific variable would be. So if I go back to my browser and I go here, I'll click enable, and this is what Authy returns. It's just JSON, and so it checks to see it'll return a message that says, hey, the user was created successfully. Here's your unique user ID, and you have success. Otherwise, it would return information saying it wasn't created successfully, no user ID, and you'd have success equals false. From there, you can actually act upon that. So in the code, I can go ahead and look and say, all right, I'm going to deserialize this JSON so I can work with it easier within ColdFusion. And I want to see if there's an actual user ID. If there's no user ID, I know that this kind of failed. I could have used the success attribute if I wanted to, but you know what? This is fine for the purposes of this demo. And then from here, what I'm doing is I'm going to create a session variable. Session variable is just a variable that persists across the whole entire session called Authy ID, and I want to store the user ID in there. Then I want to redirect out to a page called getToken.cfm. We go to getToken.cfm. It's another form, and then what it does is it looks for that unique number, the one that changes on the fly, that's based on the HMAC secure algorithm. And it's going to look for the user to input it in there so that it can go ahead and take that value that the user just typed in, combined with the Authy ID that is assigned to the user, and Authy can now verify if this is the actual user and if we should if we should actually register them for the site. So if we look at the form, it's pretty straightforward. It's just enter your token, enter your Authy token. I have a link here that says send SMS. And what I've done in here is, and let me go to main.js. Basically, I've gone ahead and created an event handler that will make an AJAX request to send SMS.cfm so that the SMS message can be actually sent out behind the scenes. So that way you don't have to redirect to another page. It's just kind of done behind the scene, and it looks kind of neat, So I'll show you that and how it actually works in action. Now, notice again that, this is just ColdFusion code. What it's saying is grab the current script name. In this case, it would be getToken.cfm and just replace it in there. So basically, we're doing a post to itself. When it comes in, it's checking to see if the user entered their Authy token. And if they have, then let's go ahead and create the API call that Authy requires for verifying this information. In this case, what we're doing is we're going to verify the user. We're going to pass over the Authy token, and we're going to pass over the user's unique Authy ID. Remember, every user gets their own unique Authy ID that they carry forward. And this is what you would end up storing in your database once this user gets verified. So we come through here and we say, all right, we're going to make a GET request. We're going to take this URL, which will probably look something very similar to this right here. Okay? That's why I put that in there so you can kind of see what it looked like. And we're going to pass it to CFHTTP. All right? Again, CFHTTP is just a ColdFusion tag that makes a request out, an HTTP request out to a remote server. And what we're doing here is we're passing a URL parameter, which is the API key. If we come back, when the results come back, we deserialize it. We check to see if it's successful, and if it's successful, then what we're going to do is just redirect to another page called success.cfm. Typically, what you would want to do is if you're successful at this point, you would want to take that Authy ID that's unique to the individual user and that was generated at the very beginning and store that into that user's database record. Remember, this whole process we've just gone through right now is to enable two-factor authentication. So you would take that Authy ID and ensure you would store that into the database record for that user. So that way, later on, when the user wants to come back in and log into your app, you can pull that Authy ID out and verify it. So again, it's a two-step process. It's registering the user with Authy, and then at login time, validating that the user is who they are via their Authy ID and the token that they're generating on the fly. And if we look at success is just HTML saying, hey, guess what? All's good. Woohoo! All right. So let's give this a shot real quick so we can see what it kind of looks like. We go back to this form, and I'm going to select United States of America. That's where I live. And you could probably tell by my accent. And again, notice we're saying turn on two-factor authentication. So I specify my cell phone number, and I click Enable. Oh, sorry. Let me do one bit of code change here because I forgot to do one thing. Let's go ahead and comment this out. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'll comment that out, and I'll refresh the page. I'll select my country, and I'll go here, and now I click Enable, and notice that it's prompting me now to enter my token. And again, this is the token that we're going to get from the app that we saw over here, if I'm correct, right here, this app. This is the app that you would get from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, or you would get from an SMS message. All right, so in this case, I can either go to the Authy app that I have on my iPod Touch, or I can send an SMS message. So let me, to show you that it's not smoke and mirrors, I'll actually make sure that the phone's nice and loud. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to request a code via SMS. Notice I have the little AJAX request. And you probably should have heard the little ding ding right there. So if I go here now, I'll get a code via SMS, and I'll type that code in, 883-6266, and I click Enable, and if everything goes well, boom, we're in. And that's how easy it was. That's how easy it was to register a user for two-factor authentication using Authy's service. Now, the next step that we need to look at is the login process. So if we look at the login process, let's go back to the code real quick. I'll go to login.cfm, and this is just a standard login page. There's nothing really dynamic, really fancy about it. I'm putting this in here as a hidden value only because I'm going to just use the same email address, and I'm not going to have a whole database login process to go through. I honestly didn't feel like doing a database for such a simple demo. All right. But typically what you'll have is a username, and you'll have a password field. And then what you'll do is you're going to go ahead and do a form post, and you're going to validate that information somewhere up here. So again, normally you would grab, notice I even wrote that in here. Normally you would grab the Authy ID from your database here after validating the username and password. So what I mean by that is that you're going to do a form post, and those values are going to be available to you for the username and the password. You're going to go ahead and validate that. You're going to make sure that this is a user in your system and that the username and the password match correctly. If they do, that means you have access to the database record, and then you also have access to that Authy ID that you stored when you registered them to Authy. Great. So now you make sure that Authy ID is available to you, whether it's a session variable in ColdFusion or some persistent variable in some other server-side language that you're using. In this case, all I'm going to do is just redirect to getToken.cfm. And we've gone through getToken.cfm before. It's the same exact page. In this page, all we're doing is we're asking for that dynamically generated number that cycles every 30 seconds via the Authy app or via SMS message. And then again, we're going to go through the process of creating the API URL. We're going to do a GET request along with our API key. And if it's successful, then great, we go through it. Remember that what ends up happening is that Authy takes the user-generated number, the one that the user will type in, and combines it with the user's Authy ID to validate whether this is the actual user. They're basically in sync based on hash information that's stored on the Authy side. And then also, it's based on the API key that you're going to have as well for your specific app. The user kind of has to be part of that, of your app, so it's going to be validated via this. All right, so let's take a look at this real quick. All right, if I go to login, notice I've already pre-filled it with raybango.com. The password's irrelevant because, again, I'm not doing a database search. I just want to go here. I already have an Authy ID that's persistent. All right, remember that when we went here, I'll go back to this code. I stored my Authy ID. So I already know this Authy ID is persistent from my previous page refreshes. So at least I know I already have an Authy ID, so I can kind of simulate a database request. So I go here, and remember this page? It says, hey, enter your token. In this case, I can go straight to the Authy app, and the Authy app cycles for, I believe, every 30 seconds again. And so I can go 406-9150. Again, the fact that it cycles so frequently is part of the benefit, part of the real reason there's a lot of security in here. So if I click there, now what it does is that it's taken this token, it's taken my Authy ID, and it's compared it to see if they match the way they're supposed to match. And if it does, we're in. So basically, that's how Authy works. It's really, really simple to implement. You know, when I first jumped into it, I was like, all right, I got to understand this workflow a little bit. That's kind of why I wrote this out. I wanted to truly understand how the workflow happened, so that way I can code out things correctly. So if we kind of look back again, all right, it's a simple form that you, in this case, two-factor.cfm, and in this form, what it does is it allows the user to register for the Authy service. All right, pretty straightforward. We're going ahead and notice that the API call is to register a new user, and we're passing over 4 key pieces of information: the API key, the user email, the cell phone, and the country code. That's the key pieces of information that Authy needs in order to create a new user for your specific application. And if successful, then what you want to do is you want to grab their token, because remember, you're going to get an Authy ID sent back to you, okay? Right here in that JSON, you're going to get something called a user.id. You want to make sure that that user ID, you store that and you persist it across a session. That's the unique Authy ID that needs to be stored into the database record for the user. Then what you want to do is ensure that the user is all set up on their mobile device, because it's not just a simple matter of saying, hey, let's turn on two-factor authentication, but the user hasn't done anything on their end, on their mobile phone. They haven't installed an Authy app, or they haven't set themselves up to receive SMS messages. So you want to kind of validate that. So that's where the get token form comes in. The get token form will ask them for their unique generating cycling token, the one that uses the HMAC secure algorithm to provide a unique number every 30 seconds. So they type that in, and once you type that in, you create the API call to verify their token. You're going to pass that unique number that's generating automatically, and you're going to pass their Authy ID. And once that information is validated, then bam, you're all set up. The new user set up an Authy, and then at that point, you want to store this Authy ID persistently in their database record. Now, once this user is all set up, the next time they come to log into your application, they're going to be presented with a normal login screen. That's a username and password. What you want to do is you want to validate the username and the password via your standard SQL query. You're going to just compare it and make sure that that user actually exists, and if it does and all's good, then at that point you want to grab the Authy ID that was stored in the database. All right, because that Authy ID combined with that token that they're going to generate is going to be that second part of the two-factor authentication that's going to hopefully prevent hackers from compromising your site. So then at that point, you go back to get token. You should already have an Authy ID. From here, you're going to ask the user to enter their dynamically generated number. And when you hit the form post and they click submit, you now make an API request that goes out to Authy, and it'll look something like this. And Authy will verify that all is good. And if all is good, then hey, no problem. Let them into the application like normal. So that's it. That's Authy. It's a great little service. I think it's relatively inexpensive, especially for the robust features that they have. And the fact that they have some pretty high-profile clients, that's great. I mean, they use DuckDuckGo, or DuckDuckGo's using them, so is Cloudflare. They got written up in TechCrunch. So I think overall, this is a pretty good service for people to start considering. So check it out, and if hopefully this screencast has given you good information and explained the process of implementing Authy into your application.